Hi everyone, the purpose of this video is to give you an overview of this word perspective, which appears quite strongly in the 11 English ATAR course. According to the syllabus, a perspective is a position from which things may be viewed or considered. People may have different perspectives on events or issues due to, for example, their age, gender, social position, and beliefs and values. A perspective is more than an opinion. It is a viewpoint informed by one or more contexts. While a pregnant woman, a homeless man, and a police officer, for example, view the world from different perspectives, they may still share the same opinion about something. Text, through an embedded ideology, can also present a particular perspective. Now, this definition might not help you that much right now, and that's why this video has been made, to help expand on this and help you to understand it. So let's move on from that definition and consider perspective through a few case studies. Now, you might not recognize this image, but this is a Predator drone. It's used by the United States to launch missile strikes against the Taliban in Afghanistan or against terrorist insurgents in Iraq. So let's consider this technology from the perspective of the Australian military, who are looking at buying some of these for themselves. And so Air Marshal Jeff Brown of the Royal Australian Air Force says, "I think a good intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance platform that's weaponized is a pretty legitimate weapon system for Australia." So he's coming from a perspective of national security and military use. Now let's contrast his perspective with that of this boy Zubair, who was a 13-year-old Pakistani testifying before United States Congress. And for him, Predator drones mean something else. He says, "I no longer love blue skies. In fact, I now prefer grey skies. The drones do not fly when the skies are grey." So now we can compare his to the Air Marshal's perspective as being two completely different things. Now, when we consider perspectives, we're not necessarily looking at who's right and who's wrong, but we are looking at what two people might bring to an issue or an event. Air Marshal Brown's perspective is informed by his position and his experience and his priorities as a military man, whereas the young Pakistani boy is seeing drones as something else entirely. And so he's informed by his own desire to have a childhood, to go out and play, but yet he can't for fear of being an innocent victim of an attack. Now let's consider something else entirely. Let's look at Australia Day and what that can mean for different people. So naturally we think of Australia Day as a celebration of all things Australian. It's a day to be proud of Australia's achievements. It's a day to be proud of the values and of all the things that are great about this country. Another perspective we can draw from is looking at Australia from a migrant point of view. It's no coincidence that on Australia Day we have many citizenship ceremonies in Australia to celebrate that diversity of the many cultures that make up Australia. Yet another perspective to draw from with Australia Day is the way it somehow can bring out the worst in Australians. I mean, we can see this picture here is presenting a perspective of that ugly side of Australian pride that can be, I guess, quite violent at times, which we saw in the Cronulla riots some years ago. Another perspective from which we can look at Australia Day is that of many Australians who see it as an invasion day, that Australia Day is a celebration of the arrival of the British in 1788. And for Aboriginal people, that's not a day to celebrate, that's a day of sadness. It's a day of invasion. It's the day that, I guess, begins the long history of dispossession, stolen generations, imprisonment, and many of the other negative parts of our history. There are people who find the idea of calling Australia Day Invasion Day offensive, but what we have to consider is that there are different perspectives from which we can look at Australia Day, and they come from different experiences, different viewpoints, and don't make the mistake necessarily of thinking that only Aboriginal people see Australia Day as Invasion Day. There are many non-Aboriginal people who would share that perspective. Now let's move into an entirely different dimension just to look at this idea of perspective. Remembering the point here is to develop your understanding of this concept so that way you can then use it and apply it in your own reading. So let's look at something from the news. Let's look at interest rates. It's really boring for many of us, but it's something that is really important to a lot of people. So let's consider that at the moment, Australian interest rates are the lowest they've been for a really, really long time. So from the perspective of somebody trying to buy a home and get a mortgage, this is fantastic news. As someone with a mortgage myself, these record low interest rates are brilliant for me because it keeps my mortgage payments down. However, I have retired parents who live off their superannuation funds. And so when interest rates are low, their perspective is that their returns, they're seeing a massive loss of money to what they had seen beforehand. And so this one event can be interpreted in completely different ways depending on whose perspective you look at. And so the perspective of the young homeowners is entirely different to the perspective of the retirees. Neither one of them is wrong. They're just looking at this event from different perspectives. It's important at this particular point just to step outside this word perspective for a moment and remind you not to confuse this word perspective with point of view, because we often can, in common language, use them interchangeably. Oh, that's your point of view, or that's just your perspective, and they mean the same thing. But when we're talking about point of view in English, we're really talking about it as being a term referring to who is telling the story and whether the story is in the first, second, or third person. There's more to point of view than that, but my point here is let's not confuse this word perspective with the literary term point of view. Let's keep them separate, and even though out in the real world we can use these words interchangeably, in English let's keep them as two distinctive terms. So perspectives then are a product of differing worldviews. These worldviews are shaped by many things, and those things can be age, experiences, education, gender, they can be ethnicity, they can be beliefs, and they can be values. But do not make the mistake of making clumsy assumptions. People's perspectives can change, but more importantly, people can hold contradictory views and be okay with that. Let's not assume that all people who have the same age have the same perspective. Let's not assume that all the people who are of the same ethnicity have the same perspective. Let's not fall into the mistake of thinking that all women think the same way. For instance, let's say about Hillary Clinton, who is running for president in 2016. Not all women support Hillary Clinton simply because she's a woman, any more than Donald Trump is not being supported by men because they happen to be men. That gender is one thing that can influence a perspective, but it's not the defining feature. That draws us to our conclusion of this. And so, just to round this out, perspectives are about worldviews. They're about ways of looking at the world. They're not to be confused with point of view in English. And they're the product of all of our experiences, but again, that warning about not making clumsy assumptions. And so this is the last you'll hear from me in this video. You're going to see a short clip following this just to add another way of thinking about perspectives. Enjoy.
The Derek Zoolander Center for Kids Who Can't Read Good.
What is this?
A center for ants? What?
How can we be expected to teach children to learn how to read if they can't even fit inside the building?
Derek, it's just a
I don't want to hear your excuses! The center has to be at least 3 times bigger than this.
He's absolutely right.
Thank you. I have a vision.